The trial hall rang with the clang of steel and the hiss of fire. Dangerous games had begun, and the cadets from across the stars were eager to outdo one another. One cadet leapt onto a narrow beam stretched above a pit of flames, spinning knives in his hands. He hurled them at a shifting target, each blade striking true while the heat scorched his skin. The crowd roared in approval. Another stood tall as he pressed a vial of glowing venom into his own vein. Muscles spasmed, jaw clenched, but he held steady until the toxin faded from sight. He flexed his arm to show victory, earning a chorus of hisses and claps. A third ignited twin plasma rods, swinging them so close their edges seared his skin without contact. Sparks flew, the audience clicked and cheered. Recklessness was honor, risk was glory. The instructor, Commandant Vethral, a towering figure with a torso like overlapping basalt slabs, raised his massive arms. The fire dimmed. The hall silenced. "You have each brought blood, heat, and venom," Vethral boomed. "Tradition runs strong, but now we begin the true trial." From beneath his black ceremonial robe, he withdrew a scroll and unraveled it with a hiss. "Each of you will present a dangerous game from your world, one that proves courage, chance, and survival. You will not be judged by spectacle alone, but by the clarity of risk, the will to face it, and the consequence that follows." Murmurs rippled through the cadets. Excitement bloomed into challenge. Rituals were not just tradition among these species, they were identity. Every game, every cut and blaze, told a story of lineage and legacy. A tall insectoid cadet named Jaron tilted his gleaming head toward the human seated calmly at the end of the row. What will he show us? Rock throwing? The sneer in his tone was unmistakable. Laughter hissed and chirped through the room. The human, a man named Daniel Knox, didn't react. His eyes followed the scroll as it was re-rolled and sealed. His hands rested easily on his thighs. He hadn't brought any equipment. No blade, no flame. That didn't go unnoticed. "I don't see a kit," another cadet growled. "Did Earth forget the assignment?" "He's soft," someone muttered. "They all are. Their bones break in light gravity." Daniel leaned back against the bench wall, face unreadable. His boots were dusty, the soles worn from long days of drills. He hadn't even polished them for the trial. Across from him, Hernix, the 10-tentacled Relian, who had once slashed open his own chest in a ceremony of endurance, whispered low, "Perhaps the human will teach us how to lose an argument with a door." More laughter. Even the instructor let the air still a moment before moving on. But Daniel remained silent, observing, watching the room like he'd already been through something worse than any of them could offer. The next morning, the assignment officially began. The chamber had been cleared, augmented with protective barriers and medical drones. One by one, the cadets stepped forward to present their games. The first, a thick-scaled warrior from Dresnal, balanced on a vibrating rod suspended over a pit of controlled plasma. He juggled live stun spheres with his upper limbs while reciting his species' death oath backward. One sphere cracked and zapped him mid-sentence. The crowd howled. The second, a scar-striped Zarnathi named Kess, injected a compound, derived from her planet's lightning beetles, directly into her shoulder. Her pulse spiked to nearly 300 BPM. Her skin flushed with electric pulses. She held her balance for nearly 3 minutes before she collapsed. Medics were on her in seconds. The third cadet dragged out a cage of shrieking slitherhawks and released them mid-arena. He ran blindfolded through their cloud, guided only by echolocation clicks from his own mouth. One talon slashed across his side, a mark of valor. He bowed, bleeding and grinning. The instructor nodded after each performance, visibly impressed. He commended them with words of ancient honor, marking down scores in the ledger with an obsidian stylus. But as the performances went on, something strange began to happen. The cadets, mid-trial and fresh off applause, started casting glances toward Daniel. He still hadn't moved. No gear, no companions, no gestures of pre-game bravado. He simply watched. Waiting. As the final alien cadet finished a whip-thin Lyrexian who played a dizzying ritual game involving magnetized blades and a countdown timer sewn into her own flesh, Vethral turned toward Daniel. There was a pause. The Commandant's gaze narrowed slightly. "Earthborn," he rumbled. "It is your time." Daniel stood. He moved slowly but deliberately. There was no hesitation, no fanfare. Just calm purpose. From his coat pocket, he pulled a small object wrapped in cloth. He walked to the center of the chamber, unwrapping the cloth with a practiced hand. When the metal glinted under the overhead lights, murmurs erupted instantly. It was a revolver. A primitive ballistic weapon. Centuries obsolete in most parts of the galaxy. The murmurs swelled into baffled noise. A relic? Is that a toy? No, it's real. I've seen one in a museum. Daniel placed it on the table in front of him and looked up at the crowd. It's called Russian roulette, he said quietly, and the chamber fell into silence. Daniel Knox let the word roulette hang in the air a second longer than necessary. Across the chamber, the collective reaction hovered between confused amusement and slow dawning unease. Some cadets leaned forward, squinting at the revolver like it might move on its own. Others leaned back, visibly disappointed. "He's bluffing," muttered the Rise-Hole twins, four-legged duelists who once cracked each other's femurs for sport. "Where is the danger?" asked Commander Vethral, his voice flat but carrying. "What risk is there in an antique?" Daniel didn't answer right away. He reached forward and opened the revolver's cylinder with a quiet, practiced motion. 6 chambers, empty. He pulled a single round from his pocket and loaded it without flair or drama. No theatrics. Just a smooth, mechanical click as the cylinder closed again. Then he spun it. The metallic rattle echoed against the chamber walls. Cadets who had stood fearless above fire or dosed themselves with paralytics now flinched at the sound. Daniel picked up the revolver, held it loosely, and addressed the room again. "There's one bullet," he said, voice calm but steady. 6 chambers. I spin it, close it, and then I pull the trigger while pointing it at my own head. Several cadets exhaled sharply. "Statistically, I have an 83% chance of surviving the first round." He paused, then corrected himself. "Approximately. Depends on how smooth the rotation. Island?" Jaran, the tall insectoid who had mocked him earlier, laughed again, but it was forced. "This is a logic puzzle," he hissed. "A game for classrooms." Daniel met his gaze. "No," he said, "it's a game for people who've run out of smarter ones." Without another word, he raised the gun to his temple. The silence was immediate and total. No sparks, no knives, no posturing. Just a man, a gun, and a room full of beings who had never understood human danger as silent. He pulled the trigger. Click. A ripple of motion coursed through the room. Someone choked. Another cadet, an amphibious Krellin, visibly swayed and had to grip a railing. Daniel didn't smile. He simply lowered the revolver, set it on the table, and slid it across the smooth surface toward the closest cadet. Hernex, the 10-tentacled Relian. "Your turn," he said. Hernex recoiled instinctively, his upper limbs drawing close to his chest. "That's not a game," he said sharply. Daniel tilted his head. "Isn't it? Courage, chance, survival? Those were the criteria." Someone in the back spoke up, their voice unsteady. "Is it loaded?" "Yes," Daniel said. "You saw me do it." Vethral stepped forward slightly, shadows playing across his face. "Your demonstration is provocative." Daniel looked at him, still calm. "It's very simple. Every time you pull the trigger, there's a 1 in 6 chance your brain ceases to function. No shields, no antidotes, no reset." Another cadet leaned in. "Why would anyone do that?" Daniel gave a small shrug. "Back home, it was a dare. People played it in basements, after parties, drunk, mostly. I had a friend who made a whole game night out of it once. Played with 5 others. He spun last, died instantly, still had pizza in his mouth. That stunned the chamber into silence again. One of the medics, a Zarnathi, the same species as the toxin injector, whispered, "But where was the honor, the ritual?" "There wasn't any," Daniel replied. "That's the point." Kess, the one who had used the beetle venom, looked visibly sick. "You play this for entertainment?" "We don't all," Daniel said, his tone flat. "But some do, enough to make it a thing." He gestured lightly toward the revolver, still sitting in front of Hernex, who hadn't moved. "I'm not asking anyone to play," Daniel said, "just showing you the rules, like the rest of you did." But no one touched it. Not even Vethrael. Hours passed before the chamber was dismissed. The revolver stayed on the table the entire time, unmoving, untouched. Even after the chamber had been sterilized and cleared, none of the droids wanted to remove it manually. Eventually, a vacuum claw retrieved it and stored it in an armored lockbox. The instructor did not comment. His silence said more than any declaration of honor. That night, the Academy's central database registered a 400% increase in keyword searches for Russian roulette, revolver, and psychological game theory. Within 24 hours, rumors were everywhere. Did you hear the Earthborn brought a death machine to the trial? I heard he pulled the trigger and laughed. No, I heard he did it twice. Didn't he say humans do that as kids? No, he said friends did it. They gamble life for no reason, no gain, just chance. The tone shifted, first awe, then fear, then curiosity. In the cafeteria, cadets stopped asking Daniel questions directly. They just watched him like he might do something else terrifyingly casual at any moment. Stand too close to a fire. Drink from a fuel line. Stare into the sun. The alien cadets who had once mocked his softness now whispered his name like a warning. Even the bravest, the ones who held plasma to their skin and spat acid into each other's mouths, kept their distance. Daniel didn't gloat. He didn't act tough. If anything, he looked tired. He spent the next few days alone, reading, eating quietly, stretching an aching shoulder from the week's drills. No one tried to spar with him. Because no one could understand the kind of courage that didn't end in scars, but in silence. The kind that could be mistaken for nothing, right until the click. 4 days passed. The revolver stayed locked away in the instructor's private vault, guarded by layered biometric security usually reserved for prototype tech or volatile relics. Not because it was powerful, but because no one trusted it not to change the room just by being in it. And change was already creeping into the halls. The Academy's corridors, once buzzing with familiar rivalry and sparring chants, took on a quieter tension. Cadets still trained, still bled and limped and laughed, but now their glances lingered longer. They watched each other too closely. Games that once ended with roars of triumph now finished with hesitant applause. In the dormitories, no one slept deeply. The sound of a dropped spoon could startle 5 different species into defensive reflex. One morning, Hernex requested to be moved to a different bunk quadrant away from Daniel. He's not violent, Hernex explained to the registrar. He hasn't said anything. But when he walks into a room, I feel like something is about to happen. Something random. It was Vethral who broke the silence. On the 5th evening, he summoned Daniel to his office. The human arrived on time, silent as usual. He wore the same cadet uniform as everyone else, though the collar had been hastily restitched after a plasma drill mishap. His left hand bore a fading bruise from a failed drop roll. Real injuries, real recovery. But none of that mattered anymore to the other cadets. Vethral waved him in, the obsidian stylus resting unused on his desk. He gestured to the chair. Daniel sat. You have disrupted the equilibrium of this cohort, Vethral said, without preamble. Daniel didn't answer immediately. That wasn't the goal. No, the instructor said, but it was the result. He stood, folding his hands behind his back. Do you understand what danger means to the species represented here? Ritual, proof of readiness, a measure of intent. It is never mindless. I know, Daniel said, but ours isn't mindless either. It's just different. Vethral turned, his dark eyes fixed. Explain. Daniel leaned back slightly. He was tired, clearly, but not evasive. We don't all play that game, most of us don't, but the fact that some do and that others watch, that tells you something. About what? That even with all our rules and comforts, there are still people who feel the need to stare into that kind of risk. Not for honor, not even for thrill, just to feel it. Silence. Then Daniel said, the games you saw from others, they're designed to test limits. Physical ones, endurance, skill. But Russian roulette doesn't test any of that. It's not about how strong or fast or smart you are. It's about how far you're willing to let chance decide if you get to wake up the next day. Vethral was motionless. And that is how your people prove courage? No, Daniel said. That's how we prove desperation. Vethral didn't speak again for a long time. Finally, he stepped aside and opened a wall panel. The revolver sat inside, inert, unassuming. Were there bullets in it? He asked quietly. Daniel met his gaze. Yes. You swear? I swear. The instructor stared at the weapon for several seconds, then closed the panel again. Leave, he said. Daniel stood and walked out. No nod, no salute, just left. That night, a new rumor began. That Vethral had tested the gun himself. No one knew if it was true, but the next morning, Vethral's right hand was shaking slightly when he held the stylus. He dismissed class early. 3 cadets attempted to replicate the game 2 nights later. They couldn't find a bullet. One of them, a Cernathi with red cresting scales, approached Daniel directly in the mess hall and asked for one. Daniel looked at him for a long moment. You want to do it? He asked. Yes, the cadet said. Why? To feel what you felt. Daniel set his fork down. I didn't feel anything. That confused the Cernathi. I did it because I had to, Daniel said, voice quiet. Not because I wanted to. The cadet stepped back without another word. The med center recorded 2 stress-related collapses and 1 case of near catatonia over the next few days. Academy administration took notice. Interrogations followed. Quietly, behind closed doors. But no one wanted to admit the truth aloud. The humans had introduced a game that wasn't supposed to be winnable. No reset. No margin for error. No catharsis. Just a sound click or bang, and then nothing. A week later, another ceremony was called. No one knew what to expect. The cadets assembled in the trial chamber again, but there were no weapons this time, no fire, no venom. Just the instructor, standing before them. Your trials are complete, Vethral said. You have demonstrated the tests of your cultures. You have shared what defines your concept of danger. He paused, then continued. In time, some of you will return to your homeworlds as champions. Others will go to war. A few will instruct others. But all of you will carry the memory of this experience. His gaze swept across the chamber, and it lingered a fraction longer on Daniel. Some games teach survival, he said. Others teach consequence. The ceremony ended without the usual chants or celebration. No scars were displayed. No wounds were honored. The cadets filed out in silence. Daniel stayed behind. Vethrael didn't acknowledge him, but when the room was empty, he spoke without turning. I checked the cylinder. Daniel didn't ask what he'd found. I respect your commitment, the instructor said, but I question your species. Daniel stepped forward. That's fair. Then he walked out. The revolver was never seen again. Official records claimed it was returned to Earth's diplomatic corps. Unofficially, most believed Vethral had launched it into deep orbit, where it couldn't be touched, but could never be entirely forgotten. 2 weeks after the trial, the Academy returned to routine. On the surface, training resumed. Cadets sweated and shouted through combat drills, cleaned gear, memorized fleet protocols. The instructors barked louder, stricter, as though structure could purge memory. But beneath the noise, something had shifted. Daniel noticed it in the way the sparring matches no longer ended with jeers or cheers. Victories were met with nods, not roars. Cadets bowed more now, held eye contact longer. The edge was still there, but it was quieter, sharper. He noticed it most in the way they watched him. Not with fear, not anymore, but with calculation, curiosity, respect, shaped like caution. Not all of them, of course. Jaegeron avoided him entirely. Kess hadn't spoken since the trial, and Hernex, once loud and dismissive, now changed corridors when Daniel entered. But others approached. A Drezen named Palv asked him one morning, "How did you stop your hand from shaking?" Daniel looked up from a maintenance console. "I didn't," he said. "You just couldn't see it." Palv considered that for a long time, then nodded and walked away without another word. By the 3rd week, the instructors began assigning cross-species team drills again, high-stress simulations, hostile environment scenarios. Daniel found himself partnered with cadets who used to mock him, not by accident. He knew Vethral was testing something. Trust. Contagion. During one exercise, a simulated pressure hull failure forced Daniel and a 4-armed Valari cadet to share a 1-person emergency suit for 46 minutes. The Volari, who once boasted about breathing nitrogen fog, was visibly shaking when they were extracted. "You didn't panic," he said afterward. "Why?" Daniel looked at him. "Because I've already had my moment." The Volari didn't ask what that meant. But he stopped flinching every time Daniel picked up a tool. It was a Zarnathi medic Threll, who finally brought it up again out loud. They sat in the recovery ward after a crash drill left Daniel with a dislocated shoulder. Real injury, real pain, the kind that didn't look heroic but lingered for weeks. Threll realigned the joint with practiced precision. Daniel gritted his teeth and breathed through it. "I read the logs," Threll said, examining the shoulder again. "That gun you used, ballistics from the 20th century, effective range under 50 meters, no safety protocols, just steel and chemistry." Daniel winced as he adjusted position. "That's right. You presented it as a game, but the emotional recoil in this cohort, cadets still have nightmares. I didn't bring it to scare anyone." "Then why?" Daniel looked at him, then away. "Because some of us have seen war," he said. "Not your kind. Not ceremonial battles or ancestral feuds. I mean chaos, civil breakdown, children stepping on mines laid 30 years before they were born, peacekeepers turning weapons on their own, governments collapsing mid-radio broadcast." He flexed the shoulder slowly, testing. "And when you've seen that, the idea that danger has rules, that it's always visible, honorable, clean, it starts to feel like a lie." Threll paused. Then said softly, "You taught us more than a game." Daniel didn't answer. Threll wrapped the shoulder, handed over a pain regulator, and left. Word spread again, but this time it wasn't gossip. It was theory. Academic. The archives recorded a sudden spike in research tags. Human risk psychology. Non-ritualized danger. Self-inflicted probabilistic trauma. A research fellow from the Batari cluster submitted a paper titled "The Paradox of Consent: Voluntary Risk Among Terran Youth." 2 instructors began hosting closed discussions for elite cadets. When danger is cultural. Daniel was never invited. But he knew. Because every now and then, a cadet would pass him in the hallway and nod. Not in greeting, in recognition. They had seen it too now. The abyss not as metaphor, but as a game someone could win by surviving. Then came the accident. An off-world transport ship, carrying new equipment modules, collided mid-docking with a training vessel. Alarms screamed across the station. Pressure loss, fire in 3 corridors. 6 cadets injured, 1 missing. Daniel, along with 2 others, was nearest to the impact site. He didn't wait. He pulled on an emergency harness and went in. Not because of orders those hadn't arrived yet, but because he knew what waiting cost. They found the missing cadet pinned beneath a collapsed strut, unconscious, leg crushed. The atmosphere was unstable. Fires licked at the edge of the breach. The strut was fused to a core conduit. Moving it risked explosion. The Dresden cadet hesitated. Daniel didn't. He made a call in less than 3 seconds. He lifted, pulled, dragged. The fire flared. The conduit sparked. He got them out, barely clearing the bulkhead before the section vented. He didn't breathe until the door sealed. His suit was scorched. His gloves melted through in places. The skin beneath blistered raw. They had to debride the burns, layer by layer. He didn't scream, not once. But he passed out before they finished. He woke 3 hours later, bandaged and blinking, painkillers thick in his blood. Vethrael stood at the foot of the bed. "You should not have gone in," the instructor said. "I know. But you did." Daniel didn't speak. Vethrael looked at the monitor. "Burns. 2nd degree on both arms. Muscle strain. You'll be grounded for 12 days. 14, Daniel corrected. "At least." The instructor nodded once. Then, unexpectedly, he said, "You moved like someone who expected to die." Daniel turned his head, met his eyes. "I moved like someone who understood the odds," he said. And the room went quiet again. 3 weeks passed. The burns healed slowly. Daniel spent the first 10 days under strict orders to keep his arms elevated and immobilized. The skin around his forearms remained red and shiny long after the bandages came off. Physical therapy followed gentle stretches, scar tissue massage, grip training. Pain returned in sharp, sudden waves when he overdid it, which he often did. "You're not recovering faster because you're brave," the medic warned him one afternoon. "You're just ignoring pain. That doesn't make it go away." Daniel nodded, didn't argue. He knew the drill, knew what it meant when his nerves buzzed like exposed wires, when the joint near his wrist clicked without warning. Real injury, real damage. The kind that lingers even after the skin forgets it. And still, he reported for morning formation every day. Left-handed at first, then both, slowly. Cadets watched him differently now. Not with fear, but with a caution that edged toward reverence. The revolver had introduced an idea. The fire had confirmed a truth. Daniel didn't want to die, but he knew exactly what it meant to risk it. At the end of the month, the Academy convened for the final evaluation. It was tradition, an official record of conduct, performance, and suitability. Every cadet's name was read aloud, their acts documented, their failures, if minor, forgiven in ceremony, their achievements engraved into record. Daniel stood near the back of the hall, arms at his sides, sleeves rolled to his elbows, the scarred skin visible but untouched. Vethrael called the names, his voice steady. When he reached Daniel's, there was a pause. "Cadet Daniel Knox," he said. "Earthborn." Another pause. Then, exemplary conduct in emergency response. Demonstrated independent risk assessment and decisive action under threat of containment breach. Sustained injury while preserving the life of another cadet. Record updated. A murmur passed through the crowd. Not applause, that wasn't tradition here. But acknowledgement. Something deeper. Then Vethrael lifted the ledger, closed it, and looked over the assembly. "There is one addendum," he said, "to the record of this cycle." Silence fell again. He tapped the sealed archive terminal beside him. The screen lit up, and a passage appeared, titled in deep galactic text. Annex, Human Psychological Risk Model, Field Case Study. The cadets shifted, recognizing what it meant. Daniel watched Vethrael closely. The instructor didn't meet his eyes. Following the trial of Dangerous Games, it has been deemed necessary to document a new cultural paradigm introduced to the Academy by Cadet Knox. His presentation non-ritualized, probabilistic self-threat has altered the interspecies understanding of how humans process danger, control, and mortality. He glanced toward Daniel now. Though the weapon was not discharged, the risk was accepted. Though the cylinder was not verified by others, the consequence was believed. This alone changed the fabric of the cohort. A long silence. "Let the record show," Vethrael said, voice quieter now, "that humans do not survive danger by mastering it. They survive by accepting that it cannot be mastered, and choosing to face it anyway." There were no more words after that. No ceremony. No closure. Just a screen flickering with new data, and a room full of cadets who would carry it with them forever. The next morning, Daniel found a message embedded in his file. "Access granted. Commandant-level addendum, sealed copy." He opened it. Inside was a short log entry. A single line. The cylinder was empty. He stared at it for a long time. Not because he was surprised, but because he had forgotten that no one else ever knew. He hadn't lied. But he hadn't said it either. And now, it was there sealed, noted, archived. Not for the cadets. For the instructors. For the next ones who came through this place thinking danger was just fire and knives and tradition. A reminder. Humans don't just face risk. They weaponize belief in it. Daniel left the academy at cycle's end. No ceremony. No announcement. He just signed his departure record, collected his gear, and boarded the transport heading to his next station. He didn't look back. But as the shuttle pulled away from the orbital ring, one of the younger cadets spotted him through the window. She didn't wave. She just held up 6 fingers, then curled one down. Daniel smiled faintly. 1 in 6. Some lessons don't need repetition. Just memory. The revolver was never reintroduced. Its record remained sealed. Its presence echoed not through scars or burns, but in a new doctrine taught quietly to every new instructor. Danger without ritual, risk without reward. Belief, weaponized. And to a single line, taught to every cadet. Be wary of the ones who bring nothing to the game but themselves. They are the ones who change the rules. forever.